I'm here with Ted Thompson, Kegel's liaison for the European 10-pin bowling federation, and we are going to talk a little bit about topography and how it influences the ball motions we see here today. And first of all, can you clarify simple what topography actually is?
Yeah. Topography is very similar if you think about mountains and valleys and landscape. You know, it's basically in bowling lane, it's a deviation from pure flatness. So in a bowling lane, we have depressions where the lane is a little dished, or we might have little crowns, a little motion. We have crosswise tilts where the lane might be high right, high left. We have lengthwise tilts, which we also factor in. So basically, topography on a bowling lane is all the peaks and valleys and tilts of the lane surface. Anything that varies from zero. Yeah, I mean, even zero would be topography, but it would be very neutral. So anything that the farther we stray away from zero or neutral, the more it affects the bowling ball.
And how in this center here in Løvang, how is the topography here? And yes.
Yep. Believe it or not, Løvang is one of the better topographies that.
So it's flat.
Well, no, there's not a flat lane in the world. That's one thing. We've measured thousands and thousands of bowling lanes, and one thing we know is there's not a flat lane in the world. And lanes themselves are kind of like fingerprints. There is no two lanes in the world that are identical. But the goal of a resurfacer or an installer is to make it fairly neutral. So you don't get a good or a bad cross. You know, and especially in a competition like this, you would like that all the lanes be similar, so everybody's kind of bowling on the same thing. But the more they vary, and the more they deviate from zero, if they're like supremely depressed or supremely crowned, or they went downhill or uphill, or they're a random shape, now that's going to affect certain styles of play at certain times. And it might, you know, bowlers have to figure it out, but there could be a certain style. And when I talk about style, I talk about ball roll, because a bowling ball doesn't care how you get to the foul line. But we're talking about revolutions, axis tilt, axis rotation. And that is what topography is affected to, speed of the bowling ball. So, yeah.
But how do you then make up a pattern for a tournament like here? If you know the topography is like this, how do you then design a pattern that fits diverse styles, and how do you do that?
It's pretty challenging, and it's more challenging than ever. In this particular bowling center, it's synthetic lanes over wood. There's wood lanes underneath. They were installed 15 years ago. The levelness of the lanes are really pretty good. They follow the wood lanes. Anytime you put a synthetic panel over top of another substrate, it's going to follow the shape of that, what's underneath it. And because most wood lanes are slightly depressed, they have like a little valley shape, the panels themselves are going to follow that after a while. Here at Løvang, they've had them leveled multiple times over the last few years. Kim Jensen really puts a lot of time and effort into making sure we get as fair a play environment as we could. But if you even notice on these lanes, you'll notice in the front part of the lane we have more depressions than we do in the mid to the end part of the lane. And that's because the front part of the lane's taken most of the beating. That's where the ball's banging on the lane. And you can see it in the topography maps. You got those reds don't really mean bad. Some people think red means bad, but no, it just means that we have some significant slopes toward center, and the dark blues and blues mean we have slopes toward the right. So, and that shows you we have a pretty good depression in the front part of the lane. So as you ask the question, you know, how do you decide on a knoll pattern? We have to kind of look at the trend in every. Well, since we've had this tool, which has only been recent, within the last 8-10 years, it makes our pattern choice a lot better. It's, I should say, a lot more educational, not as random. But in this case, we know we had all men in this tournament. We didn't have a mix of men and women, which might influence the pattern choice. Most of the men nowadays are pretty high rev rate bowlers. If we tried to put the shot toward the outside, what we notice here is the lanes go through some change, and as the week goes on and the lanes swell up, we might get a little bit more hang area outside, and we might get that on some lanes more than others. But if we put the hole pattern longer, which kind of moves the break point inside a little bit more, the lanes are a lot more consistent. So now from lane to lane to lane to lane, one bowler is not going to get a significant worse cross than another bowler, so that's fair. And that's what we try to design patterns based upon normally length, and then we start tweaking shape of the pattern as far as difficulty. And what I mean by shape is from the low point of the oil pattern to the high point of the oil pattern. And the greater that slope is, the easier normally the pattern is. And the less that slope is, the more difficult or flatter the oil pattern is. And normally the more difficult it is, the lower the scores are. And in a championship like this, we're trying to make it championship-esque. You know, this is not an open house fun league. We want the best bowlers to kind of come to the top, and people that perform the best come to the top. So that's kind of our goal. And be fair from left side to right side, and straighter players and slow. It's a challenge, but we try to take in all this information that we can and try to make the best choice we can.
Yes, and that was exactly what I thought, because you saw the scoring pace in squad 3 here in the double event. That was significantly lower than the two other squads. Do you think that was the environment around here? It's colder today.
It's not colder. Most of the time, the scoring pace squad to squad in today's environment is actually determined by the bowlers themselves. That oil pattern that we lay down, is only that oil pattern for about 15-20 minutes. Because every single time a ball rolls down the lane, especially with, as you talked about this week, with the high flare balls, you know, every single revolution, that ball is picking up a ring of oil. So every time a bowling ball rolls down the lane, it's picking a hole off that lane. And if bowlers tend to start and play all in the same place, they could make an oil pattern become very easy, because they're going to kind of groove it. If they play all over the place, well, they could make an oil pattern be difficult. If they, in practice and maybe through the first game, start to the farther to the right, that whole squad could become easy. But if a lot of players start farther inside, because maybe that's where they finished the day before and they're looking for this thing, well, that can make the pattern become really difficult later in the day. So that's kind of one of the things the bowlers have to look for, is they have to look at not only the oil pattern, but like I said, that oil pattern is the oil pattern until they start bowling on it. Then it becomes what they decide. But they have to, their coaches or team managers have to kind of follow the players in front of them to say, okay, where did this guy start, or how did this pair practice? I mean, I have documented examples of oil patterns that start out at 3-to-1 ratio, let's say, and one group of bowlers started way to the right, and at the end of 3 games, that pattern was 5.5-to-1, and on the very next pair over, the pattern started at 3-to-1, and after 3 games, that pattern only went to 3.5-to-1, just because of how the groups of bowlers played them differently. And scoring pace between the two pairs was 20 pins a game different. Happened at the World Championships a couple of years ago.
Yeah, and that's definitely something that affects the scoring pace. Yes, as you just said. But a more practical question is, how do you measure these landscapes on the? Do you have some sort of board with? Is it lasers or something? Or
as far as the oil pattern or the topography?
Topography. I'm speaking of the topography.
Topography, we actually have a tool called the lane mapper, which we have sitting down here on the thing. You could take a picture of it later. But that lane mapper, it has what we call a dial indicator or a plunger. It basically measures the crowns and depressions 2 times on every board. So we're getting across 39 boards, we're getting times 2 reads. So we can basically follow if the lane is lower or higher. We also take a cross tilt read in that spot, whether it's 20 thousandths, 30 thousandths, whatever, and then we'll add the difference, and we'll be able to calculate the slope of every board along that lane. And then we measure that every 2 feet, every 24 inches, which in meters is what? not even a meter, you know, half a meter about, or 2/3 of a meter. So we get a very good graphical representation of the lane, and from that data we can calculate the slope of every board. So we can now put that's what these color-coded charts are. They are basically telling us what degree of the slope each part of the lane is. And the darker the color, the more that part of the lane is either sloped to the right or to the left. And so the Lane Mapper is a revolutionary tool that was invented by John Davis. Even though we oil lanes, we knew our lane machines were oiling the lanes exactly the same. I mean, within a millionth of an inch. That's why you see me out there taking the lane tapes. I'm kind of controlling the lane machines. And we'll talk about oil in a minute if you like, but basically we're oiling the lane in the millionths of an inch thick. That's what we're trying to control. 54 nanometers in depth of oil. And we measure the lane topography in thousandths of an inch thick. But John was noticing that his lane machine was repeating very well, but the lane still played different. So he was curious and he was trying to say, okay, why? Well, at the time, there were no tools to accurately measure every board on the lane, what the slope was. And John invented what we call the Lane Mapper. And so we basically started studying what's going on out there and figuring out why. And that's how we came up with this tool and these graphs.
And you have been with that from the start?
Since 2004, I've been with Kegel. John had a Lane Mapper that he started in around 1999. You know, he was hand measuring for many, many years. Then he had an automatic measurer for a long time. But I've kind of been with it from the start of these more portable devices that we can travel around a lot easier. And I was creating all these reports and these graphics, and every single lane map, every single center and lane that we've measured the last 8 years, I've put together the report and studied. So yeah, I could say that I've seen more lanes than anybody in the world.
Do you think we have been around everything, or is there anything you can include to your thing?
Yeah, there's more things that we can measure. I mean, one thing to measure is the friction in the lane surface. Because
I mean, AMF lanes and the Brunswick lanes, I've always heard that AMF lanes, they have more friction than the Brunswick lanes. Is that true?
Common, you know, on a dry, when they're dry, no. You know, when a lane is dry, they both have a lot of friction. You know, when you start putting that thin film of oil on it, some lanes will be able to poke through that thin, you know, have like a texture in the lane surface or little mountains, you know, and some lanes can poke through it more. HPL is normally known as a high friction lane. Brunswick is normally a low friction lane, but now they've got different versions of Brunswick Pro Lane, and they're up their friction a little bit. And then you have some new lanes called SPL, which is another type of AMF lane, which is pretty high friction because it's very textured. But, you know, I have seen, you know, that's where this topography study is kind of interesting to me, because I've seen high friction lanes play fast and low friction lanes play slow, just based upon the shape or the topography of the lane surface. So, you know, if we're talking all things being equal, yeah, you could say there's difference in frictions, but a bowler can't just say I'm going to a high friction lane surface and it's going to hook a lot, or I'm going to a low friction lane surface and it's not going to hook, because there's that other factor, which is topography in there, or the age of the lane surface. Every time these balls go down the lane, they kind of scratch the lanes with the labels or dirt that's embedded in the lane, and they do it. So a new lane is going to have a lot less scratches on it than an older lane. And then you have some of these lanes that are really high. Some of the modern lanes are more textured or higher friction when they're new, but then after a few years the balls actually smooth them out. So they kind of they hook a lot, then they play slow, and then all of a sudden they get smoothed out, then they play faster, and then it takes a while for them to get scratched back up to kind of come back up again. So it's pretty complicated out there right now. I'd say the bowling game today is as complicated as it's ever been.
And by slow and faster, you mean by fast that less hook and slower, more hook. Yeah.
Exactly. You know, that's kind of an old nomenclature that fast normally means the ball wouldn't slow down as much, which means lower friction, and slow would mean the ball slows down quicker, which would mean higher friction. Yes.
Well, I think we have covered almost everything there's to cover. But what about the ball producers? Do they have any influence on? Are you working together with them on finding the future of the bowling sport, or how do you want it to shape in the future?
Yeah. Well, that's that's a discussion for the governing bodies. You know, John Davis, you know, our late founder, he did have some discussions with ball manufacturers at times, trying to shape the future. You know, the job of oil is to protect the lane surface. The job of the ball manufacturers is to kind of create friction and help the bowler score higher. You know, so it's hard to come to a common ground sometimes, because they're trying to push the envelope to give the people that buy their balls a competitive advantage, or give balls that hook and break through that old barrier. And we're trying to protect the lane surface and have these patterns hold up longer. So who you follow is not as big in the equation. If I follow one type of bowler, I may score really good, but if I follow another type of bowler, my score may be not so good, just because of the way they break the lanes down. And that's just, unfortunately, that's part of the game today that people have to accept if they're going to play it. But to work together, as far as that goes, I would say we tried, but sometimes you get different goals in mind. They're trying to sell balls, they're trying to make people score higher, and we're trying to protect the lane surface and let patterns hold up longer. And sometimes those two goals don't go hand in hand. So we're constantly on the forefront of developing better oils, though. Meaning try to hold up longer, protect the lane surface better, not break down as quick, to minimize some of that who you follow issue, which is inherently unfair. I mean, you don't know many other sports where your success or failure is determined by what I do. I mean.
Yeah, and just that I spoke shortly with Thomas Larsen after this third squat and double, and he just said this was just fucked up with what.
I don't. What do you mean? It was just that.
Yeah, he meant this particular squat was just I think he just said that and then turned back to his mobile again. But I think he meant he followed
people that he followed some people that just couldn't figure it out. And on championships, that can be a little frustrating because you don't get a re-entry. It's your one shot. That's one of the things John Davis always kind of objected to. But the problem with oil is it's predominantly mineral-based oil, and Kegel, we use pharmaceutical-grade mineral-based oil because we have this substance that's on the lane that gets on people's hands and body and towels, so it has to be safe to the touch. So there are some limitations that we can really do to make a lane conditioner, just not break down. And people like to say, well, couldn't you just use an oilless lane? Well, you could use an oilless lane, but an oilless lane is going to break, and it's going to have friction. There's still an object rolling over top of it. You're going to need something to protect it. And our goal really as oil men is try to use the least amount of oil possible, but still have it hold up for 12 games in this case and protect the lane surface. We could just pile oil on there, but then you're going to have pin sliding, pin setter problems, and it can create more of a mess. So we're always trying to use, even our chemists, we're trying to develop oils where we can actually limit the amount of oil in the lane, because that's kind of better for the proprietors, it's better for the consumers. We sell less oil, but we're not into we feel like if the game of bowling is there for a long time, then we'll be there for a long time. So we're trying to preserve that part.
So it's a common goal for you, and
we'll give a little bit away to kind of take in the long term. I mean, that's kind of what we're trying to do. We're not necessarily just some oil, some oil, some, you know. We're trying to figure a way to help bowling last a long time and people to enjoy it.
Well, I think that will be all for now, if that's fine.
We can talk a little bit more maybe in the week. We got a few more days left. I do have some graphics that can show the fresh oil pattern versus the breakdown of like this particular squads and stuff. So maybe we can bring those into it and continue this discussion a little bit later in the week to show how the oil pattern actually does break down, how much change there is through the first game of the block to the second game of the block. I could put something together for you and show that.
That would be really great. Really great. So
great. Thanks.
Thank you.